I'm on Start Point in South Devon. It's a beautiful headland sandwiched between the Dartmouth and the Salcombe estuaries, and I'm here to explore an extraordinary story. Down here are the remains of an old fishing village, once a happy coastal community, families eking out a living from the sea in Start Bay, until dredging of sand and shingle from their beach on an industrial scale threatened the survival of that community. And then a terrible storm came in the new year of 1917, swallowing that village into the sea forever. I'm here to find out more. Grant, this is an amazing place. What happened here?
Okay, so it's Hallsands, or the lost village of Hallsands, is a fascinating story of when dredging works resulted in the loss of an entire village. So this is the ruins of a village that was inundated by the sea in the 1917, but has a very long history up to that from 1895 of how humans messed with the natural order of things by dredging here, resulting in a village of 100, a very prosperous village of a population from 100 to around 96, eventually being completely lost to the sea and has never come back.
What do we know about the village that was here before it was lost to the sea?
Okay, so the early prehistory we don't know that much about. However, we know the village was here by the 16th century. Its mass expansion to the population around 120, I believe it is in the 17th and 18th century when the fishing starts to kick off. The main industry for the village was crabbing and fishing. So they used to use a method called seine fishing, so where they take the nets out into the sea, go around the thing and then bring it into the shore on boats. So they go around the fish and then bring them in on boats, and there's loads of lovely photos of this. What you can't imagine now looking at these ruins is that there used to be a beach of around 30 metres outwards from the houses. So they start dredging in 1895. That lasts for 5 years, but even then they're not listening to locals. It's always a problem when it comes to maritime infrastructure, but even then, by 1897, the locals have already started to complain, noticing that their beach that was 30 metres is going down and down and down, and they've got about, by spring tides in November 1900s, they've only got about 1 metre of play next to their houses. So they're getting very worried at this point. And there was a clause in the contract for the dredging saying that if there was considerable damage to the local population, they would stop. However, the saga continues, and then the dredging company agrees to put in sea defences. But by 1905, you have some huge spring tides and storms that destroy a hell of a lot of the village, and the actual pub that was in the centre, the London Inn, is completely destroyed, and there's only a wall left, and I'll show you a photo of that later. And once that's gone, the population was around 126 at that point. That goes down to 97, even though the dredging company puts in new sea works. No one has that much confidence. You're not going to have that much confidence once your house has already been knackered. You're not going to have another round of confidence after that. So then this continues. The dredging has completely stopped by this point. They stopped the license for the dredging in 1900s, and they do not continue dredging. But by that point, the damage is already done, and the beach continues to erode and erode and erode out these people's livelihoods. And then eventually in 1917 you have these gigantic tides that break the sea defences, and the local population on that night of January, 27th of January and 28th of January is when these storms happened. They've battened down all their boats in the high street, knowing this is about to happen. The storms and spring tides come in and they destroy all the village to what it looks like now. So you lose all those buildings, with the last remaining one being here. Luckily, around then, they believe the population was around 76. No one dies. But you do have these stories of people sleeping in the ruins. Afterwards, they all become homeless overnight, and their livelihoods have gone. So then you get into this, then you would think the story ends, there's compensation. They argue for compensation. It doesn't end there. So in 1917, they're still arguing for compensation. They essentially become the first, we've kind of termed this the first climate change refugees, which isn't a term that existed then. Now it's a term we understand with the things that are going on in Wales and different places, that there will be climate change refugees. This is a 1900s example of what happens when a village's livelihood that is reliant on a natural feature goes completely.
Why were they doing this dredging?
Okay, so they're taking the shingle and sand from Start Bay to build a new Admiralty port over in Keyham near Plymouth. Starts around 1895, they continue this for 5 years. It's estimated, a conservative estimate is that they took out 300,000 metres cubed of material. The non-conservative estimates are a lot higher, and it's very difficult, as you can imagine, to work out how much was actually dredged 100 odd years ago.
I assume no one spoke to the residents about them removing their beach.
Okay, so I don't think it came as a surprise that they were dredging. They weren't consulted in mass, like there wasn't a forum or something that we'd have today, but there was a clause put in that if it affected them, they would stop dredging immediately. It being the 1800s, they kind of ignored the locals, so even when significant loss of the beach was noticed by 1900s, they then eventually revoked the license, but the locals have been complaining from all the way from 1895 when they started dredging all the way up, with considerable reports and various other stuff produced saying our beach is disappearing, can you do something? And then the dredging company tries to put in deep sea defences and things to placate the locals, but they still it keeps happening, and they notice their livelihoods are starting to go and confidence is gone.
What's the historical evidence like for the village that used to be here?
So we have some incredible photos that have been curated for us by the South Devon AMB, who put in the platform we're stood on in 2012, and we have some beautiful photos, and because it's quite a modern example, photography exists in the 1800s and in the 1900s, so we have examples of this beach. We can see them pulling their boats onto Hallsands beach when they have a beach, and obviously now there's no beach and the idea of actually pulling a boat onto that beach is, you can't even imagine this. And there's beautiful images of the high street, beautiful images of the crab pots and kids and families living here, and how prosperous this village would have been. So yeah, we have some beautiful photos, and I'll just show you some of these. So you can see here, this is what the Hallsands used to look like. This building,
wow,
it's right at the back there, and you can see.
So little kids here, we've got 5 of them, yes, on a log.
They are sat there,
yeah,
on that wall, just a little bit further down. So this, coming out here, was the main high street.
Yep.
And you can see that it's all gone into the sea now, even though it's been reinforced probably in the 50s. You can see just how much beach used to exist and how it doesn't exist anymore. There's some beautiful images again of this, which is the Seine fishing. So you can see it's a...
Oh, we've got men and women all working together, yeah, hauling in.
And there is a great story that was told to me by the South Devon A&B of, apparently there was a lot of piggybacks given to men to not get their trousers wet through their boats
right, okay,
by women, which was a very interesting story. You'd have to confirm that one with the South Devon A&B. But yeah, as you can see, Seine fishing is a village affair. So once they've got the net round the shoal, they then bring it into the beach, and then the whole village hauls that net in to get.
So you've got a real community here, living together. And there's a pub, isn't there?
Yeah. So this is the image of the 1903 storms.
Wow.
So this was the first set of storms that destroyed a fair amount of buildings and forced the dredging company to build further sea defences.
So here we've got an image of this. You've got a building here, and a huge storm coming at high tide. I mean that house there, it looks like it's a flood defence, and obviously a house is not a flood defence.
Yeah. And it looks like it's about to go. And this was the remains of the village after those 1903 storms. Yeah. And then this is it by 1917, and you can see just the damage is done here, but this is just all. Yeah, and it looks like we've got a picture here. This is for you podcast listeners who haven't got any visuals. We've got a picture here. It looks like a huge JCB has driven through the middle of a fishing village, taking off roofs, knocking down walls. It's an unimaginable scene of destruction. That's very sad, isn't it? Yeah, and you can see this is the sea defences here, some of which you can just kind of make out now. Yeah. But they were completely inundated in the 1917 storm. Yeah. And what else do we know about Start Bay? This is an extraordinary location. Yeah, so interestingly, the actual dredging is a little bit of a benefit for us as a citizen. We often end up with this situation where eroding foreshores actually produce archaeology as well. So there is a submerged forest underneath Hallsands. Wow. And how old is it? No one's quite sure. The dating isn't very specific on it, but you can see every so often, particularly at North Hallsands, which is over that little ridge. That was the houses that were eventually built to accommodate the village. Of what was left of it, they only built a very small amount that couldn't accommodate the climate change refugees left from Hallsands. Okay. But on that beach, you can still see every so often after a big storm, you can see these large peat shelves, and in there you'll see the submerged timbers and submerged forest poking out.
Fascinating stuff. And this is now the village itself. It's super dangerous. We're not allowed to get down there. Has it been surveyed? Have archaeologists done any work down here?
There's been a few people have flown drones over it. There was a few little surveys done, but I don't believe anyone has done a big, large survey of what the remains look like now.
I'll say now, we've actually managed to get some of that drone footage. So if you're listening on the podcast, do check out the YouTube channel where you can see that amazing drone footage. I mean, one of the concerns here is that the village is going to get lost. These remains will get completely destroyed, won't they? Which we don't want to happen.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful site. I mean, anyone who's walked the walk from Start Point down to Slapton Sands will know and have seen the placards and stuff that tell you this village is here. But the ruins are an incredible kind of site. There's a lot of, when I did this walk with a group of locals, one of the elderly women gave me a load of sketches that she did as a child when you could get down here. So it's still eroding out. So I remember when I was a child...
Have you still got those sketches?
I do have those sketches.
Oh, let's see if we can get them. We'll have a look at those.
So yeah, when I was a child, you could still get all the way down, and this house here is the last resident of Hallsands. It's owned by a woman called Elizabeth Pettyjohn, and she was the last resident even after the storms in 1917, and she stubbornly refuses to move and stays there all the way up to the 60s, I believe.
Is it good for her, or is that seriously dangerous? It feels quite precarious.
It's quite an interest. Personally, when I heard you could rent it out, I was very up for renting that out for a survey. But
yeah.
But yeah, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different stories. One of the weirdest parts about this is the compensation element to it. So they don't, even after their whole village is destroyed, and no one takes responsibility for it. Even then, you have this population of about 70 that have been essentially abandoned. They are going for compensation. They do eventually get a few houses built, but not enough to accommodate them. They went from self-sustained, owning their own buildings, having their livelihoods, to suddenly having to rely on friends and families, locals, renting, and all the other stuff. And essentially they don't give them compensation, and the reports of this get hidden all the way up until the Second World War, amazingly, until they finally reveal what happened here.
What's the big lesson of Hallsands? What do we need to not ever forget about this place?
I think it's something that we are now currently forgetting, is the time to act when you start to notice stuff like this is immediately. Like, one of the curses was when the locals said their beach was being removed, they weren't listened to. There was no reaction to it. They put token gestures, they put sea defences in, they put other stuff, but they didn't react. And we're having a similar thing at the moment with climate change, where stuff like this is happening all over our coastlines at ever increasing rates, and we're not really reacting to it in the way we should be.
Yeah. Well, an important lesson there for us all, I think.